Good morning. With the help of Hashem, we are learning Yerushalmi Shavis. We are starting the 6th chapter, Pedig Vav Halacha Aleph. We're learning today Daf Mem Beis. We left off on Daf Mem Aleph, Amid Beis, the last line, by the Mishnah, by the Pedig of Shalosh Arotzes. Now, we're going to speak a little bit in today's introduction, which is extremely important and fascinating. We will be following, when we open up the sugya, the shita of the Rambam. Actually, we're going to be learning a few halachas first from the Rambam proper. We are speaking about different maps that could be drawn and that are drawn, maps of Eretz Yisrael. There's the map that we have of the Holy Land that Hashem promised Avraham Avinu. Ultimately, that includes 10 nations. But even the original 7 nations have one unique map, the nations that God promised Avraham Avinu on Parshas Lech Lecha. We have the map of Eretz Yisrael that came to us through the conquest, through the kibush that was done under the leadership of Yehoshua. Now, make no mistake, Yehoshua didn't only conquer the land, we settled the land, right? Those are the 14 years. But we're going to call that the conquest of Yehoshua. There was subsequent to that the Churban Bayis Rishon, and then we have the settlement, the Chazaka, that was affected under the leadership of Ezra HaSofer. In other words, the Persian monarchy gave permission to the Jewish people to return and to resettle our land. However, we did not resettle all of the land that was previously conquered under the leadership, or beginning with the leadership of Yehoshua. That which was promised to Avraham Avinu B'chlal won't be discussed right now. What will be important when we open up the perek called Shalosh Arotzos, the Shalosh Arotzos, the 3 lands. This is not Chevra. We're not talking about the 3 Medinos. That's a whole different topic. Benegeya Biur. That's not what we're talking about. We simply want to know whether the obligations that are Tuluyim Ba'aretz, and there are obligations that are connected to the Holy Land, meaning that outside of Eretz Yisrael, those mitzvahs don't exist in practice, because we're not living off the land, we're not living on the land, they're not mitzvahs Tuluyim Ba'aretz. What land are we talking about? So what we will have in our Mishnah is the difference between the lands that have the maximum Kedusha, and those will be the lands that were settled under the leadership of Ezra. And let me already get familiarized with the words that Kedusha, the Kedusha Rishayna, which is referring to the Kedusha that was imbued in the Holy Land through the kibush of Yehoshua. We are going to paskin, even though it's a machlokes Tanoim, it's a machlokes Amoraim, it's a machlokes Rishonim. We're going to follow our sugya Kishita Sanambim, that Kedusha Rishoina Kitcha L'Shaita, but Veloy Kitcha L'Asad Lavi. In other words, that Kedusha remained in the land only as long as we were living there. The moment there was the Golus Bavel, that Kedusha departed. And on that, we're going to learn a nuance, not that it's negay to our Mishnah, but just for the sake of clarity, and it's going to be negay later, that does not include Yerushalmi. Yerushalmi beginning with the Makom HaMikdash. That Kedusha, even though, let's go with the Rambam, we take a paskin, that Kedusha Rishoina, Kitcha, L'Shaita, V'loy Kitcha, L'Asad Lavoi, that's not connected to Kedusha of Yerushalayim, which means the Kedusha of the Makom HaMikdash, because the Kedusha of Yerushalayim is coming from the Kedusha of the Beis HaMikdash. That is always there. That was never nullified. That's why we were allowed to bring korbanos between the Bayis Rishon and Bayis Sheni, and certainly we are allowed to bring korbanos right now, independent of a Beis HaMikdash, simply because the Kedusha is always there. The Kedusha of Ezra, which is on a much smaller piece of land, that Kedusha remains permanent. Kibush was nullified by Kibush, and the Chazaka was never taken away. And there's more words I would like to share at the end of the shir as to why not. First of all, the Kibush of Yeshua was also Kibush and Chazaka. We settled there. But it began with Kibush. Okay, Zozain. On the other hand, why wouldn't the Kedusha of the settlement of Ezra be removed when we were removed from the land by the Churban of Rome, Galus Edom? So if kibush can nullify kibush, why wouldn't chazaka, that other nations settle the land? Why does that not nullify the kedusha that came through chazaka? We're going to leave for that for later. But first, I want to read a little bit in the Rambam. This is very so. What are the three arotzos? That which was conquered, that which was settled under Ezra, that has kedusha. We're going to go with the approach. Therefore, theoretically, all of those places are obliged to have shvi is kept, because shvi is a mitzvah hatului ba'aretz. And on a biblical level, shvi has to be kept in the localities where Oila Ezra settled. Now, I know that when it comes to shvi, there is a side thing. Even though the land has kedusha, there is another component that the Torah links shvi to yovel. Yovel is linked to kol yoshveh olel. So there is also a linkage between having Jews living on the Holy Land, as we're going to learn also concerning Trumais and Maisres, Keshitas and Ambam, right? You have to have the Yidden living there. I know that, but that's another layer. But let's first begin with Kedusha Sa'aretz. The maximum Kedusha Sa'aretz is the lands that were settled under Ezra. That's one type of land. The second of the three are lands that were conquered and settled under Yeshua by Oila Mitzrayim, even though that kedusha went away, but Bezman Bayesheni, there was still a rabbinic obligation to keep shvius over there, as we're going to learn in the Mishnah. Not connected to Yovel. In other words, the land still doesn't have the original kedusha, but there is still some type of vestige of kedusha that brings about a rabbinic obligation and a manifestation in the laws of shvius. The third of the three lands is everything else. Everything else. What our Mishnah does not mention, if that's the way we're learning Pshat in the Mishnah, the way we're following a certain Mahalach, there is a fourth, and that is Syria. And that is something that we'll leave for the next Mishnah. I'm mentioning Syria because when we're going to read the Rambam doesn't organize it the way the Mishnah organized it. First, our Shalosh Arotzos. Oile Bavel, that's called Ezra. Lower level of Kedusha, Oila Mitzrayim. Everything else, that's our Mishnah, that's the three Arotzos. And then next Mishnah is Syria. The Rambam, to begin with, speaks about Shalosh Arotzos, and he includes in that Syria, but that detail is not Negeya right now. I'm learning from Sefer Zerayim, Hilchos Trumos, Perek Rishon, Halachem, hey, says the Rambam, and that's the way we're going to follow this whole sugya. Kol shehechaziku oila Mitzrayim, all of the lands that were settled, that's under Yeshua. V'neskadesh kedusha rishayna, kiven shegalu, batla kedushasan. Shekedusha rishayna lefi shehoisem mepnei hakibush bilvad, kitchel l'shaita v'loi kitchel l'asad lavi, v'loi kitchel l'asad lavi. However, kiven she'olu b'nei hagoyla, v'hechaziku b'miksas ha'aretz. So that second one is kitshua kedusha shenia ho'imedes lo oilam l'shaita ula asad lavi. And again, remember, even though the kedusha is lo oilam, there was another layer, which is that when Yidden are not living there, it could be there's no obligation to keep some of the mitzvahs hateluyas ma'aretz midoiraisa because you don't have the Yidden living there. Like when it comes to Yovel, like the way that Rambam connects Shvi'is Shemitah to Yovel, and it's only midrabanan. That's a second thing that we're not going to focus on today. Today we're focusing on the kedusha of the aretz. Mitzvahs tuluyas ba'aretz. What's the aretz? So the aretz that was conquered on the Mitzrayim lost its kedusha. So those mitzvahs biblically are no longer mechuyev to be kept over there. Now, the Rambam in Hilchos Beis Abchira, in the 6th chapter, let me just find it over here. So we're going backwards now. Sefer Avodah writes that in Halacha Tezayin, even though the Rambam said later, the Rambam Paskins, Kedusha Rishon Kitchel Shaita V'Loi Kitchel Asad Lavoi, the exception is the whole Yerushalmi coming from the Beis Hamikdash. Says the Rambam, V'Lama Ani Yomer B'Mikdash V'Yerushalayim Shekedusha Rishona Kitchel Asad Lavoi. Why is that different? Ubekedusha Sha'ar Eretz Yisrael L'Inyan Shvi'is our sugya Ula Maisres V'Chayoytze Behem Loi Kitchel Asad Lavoi. Lefi says that Rambam shekedushas hamigdash v'Yerushalayim comes from the Shechina, and the Shechina is not batal. It's a big statements. We would think kedusha is always because the Shechina is shoichen. No. V'harei oimer v'hashimoisi as mikdashechem, right in the Toichecha. V'amru chachamim af al pi she'shoimemim b'kedushas and heinoimdim. Aval, I'm reading the Rambam. Aval chiyuv haaretz, which is our Mishnah now. B'shvius u'b'maisres. Einoi elam epnei kibush and abim. We're talking about the Olam Mitzrayim. The original kedusha was because there was conquest. The kiven shenilka haaretz miyidayim. When the Babylonians conquered it from us, but like kibush. V'niftara min ha'toira, min ha'maisres and min ha'shvius. Shaharei eino eretz Yisrael. Listen to words. The kiv and shala esa. The Rambam is v'kitcha loy kitcha b'kibush elo b'chazaka shechziku ba ulefikach kol makim shechziku ba oila bavel v'neskadesh b'kedushas Ezra hashniya hareu mikudesh chayoim. The Rambam writes in Golos af al pi sheniklecha haaretz mimenu v'chayev b'shviyas u'b'maisres. Now, again, Chayev B'Shvius U'Maisris has to take into account another topic, that even though the land has Kedusha, when Yidden are not living there, we'll see, certain things will also be exempted thereof. They'll be Aptur, Midai Raisa. But we want to begin with that which emanates from the land. And that will be the whole daf today. The daf today will be to show you what nafkamina we keep rabbinic law. But even on a level of rabbinic law, there's going to be a difference practically between what am I mechuyev in shvi'is if I'm living in the lands that were conquered by Ezra, more midoi raisa, or a lower level of obligation on the lands that were conquered by Olam Mitzrayim that were not resettled. Now, I know when we were learning Rambam, I just want to take maybe a picture of this because that will be neged to our Mishnah. We are using here the art scrolling Yerushalmi. He did not make maps. Doesn't matter because the maps are not that negeya. I do know that Steinsaltz, when he Evan Yisrael, when he made his Rambam, which I think is Gavaldik, we're going to see these maps are very helpful to hear one of the approaches in understanding our Mishnah as to what parts of Eretz Yisrael are not Bisman HaMishnah, were not resettled by Oila Bavel, but they were conquered by Oila Mitzrayim. So you're going to have over here, like there's a city called Kiziv. And Kiziv is north of Akkoy. And you can see over here, there's a little strip of land on the beach itself between Kiziv and Akkoy that were not settled by Oile Bavel. But they were conquered by Oila Mitzrayim.
Which book of Rambam are you on? Zerayim?
The Rambam that I'm on is, we're learning Sefer Zerayim. This is in Sefer Hilchos Trumais, Perek Aleph. In his Sefer on page 419. Because there's going to be a place called Adi al-Arish, which is going to be a Nachal Mitzrayim that our Mishnah will speak about. That's all the way down in the south. And we'll see. Okay, anyways.
Are we only learning according to the Rambam, or are we covering the Ravid's opinion as well?
We are learning Shitas Rambam when we're learning the Sugya. That's how you, in other words, because it simplifies the Shalosh Haratzis. Danny, Sikum, Shalosh Haratzis is the highest land of Kedusha are the lands that were settled by Oile Bavel. There's a lower level of rabbinic obligation. Land settled by Oile Mitzrayim, that's 2. And everything else is 3. Period. What about Syria? Because Syria, we will see in the next Mishnah, is like another L'Rambam. Not L'Rambam. The Rambam made a whole different Seder. Syria is Eretz Yisrael and not Eretz Yisrael. We'll see the boundaries, the halachic boundaries of Syria. It's not the way it is today. Actually, some of the Oile Mitzrayim might have gone up all the way up until Turkey. That's why they're so nervous with us. They know what's coming to them soon. Okay. I mean, that's the whole daf. And the Gemara is going to reiterate that we don't say, the Gemara says, even though there are chazals that say different, that we have a Rashi, that all of the mitzvahs really are connected to the Holy Land. And like we have that keep the putting on tefillin b'chutz la'aretz is only a training for putting on tefillin in Eretz Yisrael. Our Gemara doesn't follow that. We're going to today's daf will be machalik b'chlal by mitzvahs. Mitzvahs that are not toloyas ba'aretz are equally obligated everywhere. Mitzvahs hatuloyas ba'aretz, the definition of aretz is certainly not the land that was promised to us by Hashem to Avraham Avinu, because it's not ours yet. It's not even the land that we had ba'olam Mitzrayim. It's nowadays, that means after Churban Bayis Rishon until the coming of Mashiach, it refers to the lands that were settled by Oile Bavel, or under the leadership of Ezra, any way you want to word it. Okay, let's go. Start the mission. Sholosh Aratzois L'Shvis. 3 countries, 3 lands regarding the laws of Shvis. And let's go. We're going from the holiest to the least holiest. So Kol Shehechaziku Oile Bavel. Not Oile Mitzrayim. Historically, this came much later, 1,000 years later. Be'erech. Kol Shehechaziku Oile Bavel. Me'eretz Yisrael ad Giziv. We are going with the approach that Giziv and Kiziv are the same cities. Okay? And it's a city in the north, right north of Akkoy, as we just showed in the picture. Very good. Being that it's a city that's Eretz Yisrael, whoever's looking at the picture that Evan Yisrael wrote in his Rambam, without that little laddered off area, that's a little strip of land. And by the way, we learned, which Masechta was it? Was it in Peah? Was it in what was it? It was in Kalayim. It was in Kalayim. We were learning about different cities on the Mediterranean that Lav Dafka were part of the Holy Land. Kilei Zeroyim, because Kilei Zeroyim is only Noyig Baretz. We learned a lot about different maps, and there we had different maps. But we're already familiar, right? That it could be that case sudden. We know that there are cities on the beach that they were probably very chashuv, and maybe the Persians did not allow us to settle there. I don't know how it came to be, but we did not settle there. And now you get it. So even though they were conquered under by the times of Yeshua began the conquest. The conquest took many years. It lost the kedusha. No, like kitchula asadlav. Now, what would be the nafkamina? Very simple. Here's what the Mishnah says. We're going to follow one way of learning the Mishnah. Loy nechal v'loy nevad. Guys, remember these words. Nechal means biur. That means, even though we didn't learn the details of biur, what we spoke about it many times, that if produce is no longer found in that region in Eretz Yisrael, there are 3 Medinas. Don't confuse the 3 Medinas with the 3 Aratzes. That if that type of food is no longer found out there, lebehemas v'lachayis, then you have to do biur. And we already spoke about the machloikas between the Rishonim, Rambam and Ramban. What does that mean? But the din of loy nechal means you're obligated to oblige by the laws of biur. After the time of biur, if you didn't do biur, you can't eat it, period. Even Ramban, you have to be mafked. Number 2, v'loy nevad. The simple, you can't work the land. That's the meaning of loy nechal v'loy nevad. Daf Mem Beis on the top. Second area is kol shehechaziku oila Mitzrayim, which is much more than oila Bavel. Now again, when it comes to the maps, the great scholars that put this together, they didn't spend enough time for whatever reason. They didn't write the maps. But now he writes like this: from Kiziv, because the oila Bavel was until Giziv. What about further north? So let's go with the pshat mikiziv ad hanoar and va'ad amona. So you have to know which is in the north and which is in the south. Now the problem is that kiziv to amona, to kiziv ad hanor is going south. Now I take a look at the map that we have. Whoever has Zoom, if you don't have Zoom, it doesn't matter. Doesn't matter. So the Nod is referring to what we will call Nachal Mitzrayim, or to what's called Wadi El Arish, pronouncing it Keminig the Arabs. I can't do that. So if Kevin, if you can make the picture bigger, take a look at Adi Al Arish. Now, when we are saying that from Kiziv all the way down to Adi Al Arish, what does that even mean? What? It means that's the whole coast. So you can see that in Rabbi Steinsaltz, what he did was he made a line in the water, not on the land. But there is strips somewhere from Keziv in the north, all the way down to the Nahar, which is Nahar Mitzrayim, or Nachal Mitzrayim. And also from Keziv all the way up to a place called Amana. I want you to know that Amana might be going all the way up until Turkey. Now, exactly which strips they are, this you see the way that Rambam understood it. It doesn't matter. So those areas which are beyond the settlement of Oilei Bavel, yes, we go that Kedusha Rishayna Kitchel Shaita Veloy Kitchel Asad Lavoi, but that's only Midoiraisa. But Midrabanan, you have to keep Shviz. But the Chachamim differentiated. It's not on the same level, Midrabanan, even though it's only a Midrabanan. What is the dinam of Shviz? Nechol. Nechol means there is no Dinei Biur. The Dinei Shviz that the Chachamim obligated us to keep was Loy Nevad. The Loy Nevad is only Midrabanan. Of course, if the Loy Nevad would be Midoiraisa, then if you can't work the land, you have to keep the dinam of beer. It's like, I'll give you an example by Tumah and Tara, Danny, right? That many times the Chachamim, in order to remind us that the Tumah is only Midrabanan, they said that only one part of the Keli is Tummy. Right? The inside, the outside. To remember, it's an Isser Midrabanan. They made an Isser Midrabanan and they limited their Isser Midrabanan. Everything that I'm saying now, I just want to repeat it for the final time, is independent of something else, which is that if you link Shvi'is to Yovel, and therefore there is also the component of having Kol Yoshve'aleh or Roiv Yoshve'aleh, then Shvi'is will also be Midrabanan, as will be Trumais, as the Rambam Paskins. But look at the beauty. That's another step. We're beginning from something more foundational. The land itself doesn't have Kedushas Eretz Yisrael vis-a-vis the laws of mitzvahs hataloyas ba'aretz. It's the land that God promised the Jewish people. But the chiyuv of Shvi'is, even though it was conquered by Yoel Mitzrayim, that's the sheet of this Mishnah, and that's the way that Rambam Paskins. Now, what's the third? In our Mishnah, we're not going into Surya, which is a third category. We're not going there. Oila Bavel, the highest, Oila Mitzrayim, and the ganze Welt. Min hanor ume amana vilafnim, anywhere else. Nechol v'nevad. Nechol v'nevad means because it's bana fight chutz la'aretz. And we're going to leave Syria. Rabbeinu HaKadosh is going to put Syria in the next Mishnah. Okay. And now we need just scriptural sources. How do you know? How do you know that it's noig only ba'aretz? And if there's a concept of mitzvahs that are tului, that are noihagois only ba'aretz, why wouldn't we apply it to all the mitzvahs? That's going to be the whole rest of the daf. Says the Gemara. Ksiv, we're quoting a pasuk in the 8. Eila hachukim v'hamishpatim asher tishmanu lasois ba'aretz. What's ba'aretz? If mitzvahs is an obligation for Yidden to keep wherever we live in Olam Hazeh, as long as we are alive, then it should not say ba'aretz. So say Chazal clearly, ba'aretz atam chayavim lasois. V'i atam chayavim lasois b'chutz la'aretz, period. We are going to follow the various girsa'os that omit the next words. Take them out. In other words, there's an explicit pasuk in the A that links observance, chukim and mishpatim. You should know you can include all the mitzvahs in there, even though sometimes we have another category of edus. Doesn't matter. The two extremes, the chukim that are completely beyond lamayla mitam vadas, mishpatim that Hashem allowed it even to calm down lamata in tam vadas, doesn't make a difference, and everything in between. So says the Braisa, Daf Mem Beis Amid Beis, Yochel afilu mitzvah she'enem tluis v'aretz oy bazoi. That's chukim u'mishpatim. That what? Maybe on a biblical level, lo yiyu noihagois ela ba'aretz. And by the way, since the idea that the Rab Levik was that even a havamina in Torah, that the Gemara says bedusehi is a havamina. That's why you have certain chazals that say, and all of the Mizrachim will quote you all of these chazals, how even putting on tefillin is only practice for putting on tefillin in Eretz Yisrael. and you have all of these halachic shilas, let's say Kiddush Levana right now. Some people, I said Kiddush Levana 2 nights ago because we had a bad experience many years ago, and it's cloudy every night. But even though ideally you're supposed to wait for Matzah Shabbos, but we only begin after the 7th day anyways. So what happens if a Jew is traveling to Israel? Good shilah. This is a shilah that people ask. And it's, let's go, Kimino Geno, Al Pi Kabbalah, it's the 7th night, the 8th night, they can say Kiddush Levana here in LA, but they're going to be in 2 days, they're going to be with Yakir. And they're going to be before the Zman, and the weather is predicted to be open skies. Is there an inyan to wait to say Kiddush Levana in Eretz Yisrael? I want you to know, and many people say yeah. In other words, there is such a thing that a mitzvah, any mitzvah that is done by Eretz Yisrael has more koyach, is the ultimate kavanah. There is such a havamina. That's the havamina. Maybe yachal afil mitzvah she'enet lo yisbaaretz lo yiyun hagas elas baaretz. So says the Rabbi, no. Talmud loimer. Now we're going to a pasuk in Ekev before the 8. What does it say over there? It says Yishomru lechem pen yiftem levavchem. Right? We know this pasuk. We say it every day. V'chad af Hashem bochem. The samtem is the vora ela al levavchem. Al levavchem. And what does the pasuk say? The pasuk says that we should put on tefillin, right? Tefillin in V'hoyim Shemaya. That's the say. The tefillin, Talmud Torah, right? Mezuzahs at the end. There's a mimer of the Alter Rebbe why the seder is different. But let's go with. We're focusing now on tefillin and Talmud Torah. So here we say that afilu goylem, the whole hemshech hapsukim is that God forbid, and it already happened. It just won't happen again. That we were sent into Golos. That's the V'hoyim Shemoya. We're going to be expelled from Israel even after we go into Golos. V'samtem is the vara ela alabavchem. We're put on tefillin. V'lemada temois, teach your children. That means afilu goylem. V'samtem is the vara ela alabavchem el nafshechem. Ma islach, what mitzvahs are we meant to keep even after we go into Golos? Mitzvahs that are similar to these two. Kedoin, tefillin, v'talmud Torah. What's unique of tefillin and Talmud Torah? Ma tefillin and Talmud Torah she'enam tuluyois ba'aretz. Keep your finger in the Gemara. Look inside that Asherilio, the second line from the top right. She'enam tuluyois ba'aretz. Because actually, no, she'en tuluyos is the negative. What are they? How do we classify them? So that Asherilio says regarding tefillin, regarding the mitzvah of Talmud Torah, beginning with teaching our children and our Talmidim, she'en choivas haguf, the enon mutalois Loi al hakarka. How do you define it? It's not a mitzvah on the land. It's not a mitzvah on gidulav. It's a commandment to the yid, to the person. Ella al gufay shel adam. Kegoin hane. To come mefaresh. Tefillin, the Talmud Torah, umezuzah, umila. But you don't know, mezuzah is written in the pasuk. There, in these psukim, right? In V'hoyim Shemaya. Why he puts it over here, Mila? Question. I don't know why he decided to do that. He's just, there's many other examples, but it's called a mitzvah. He calls it choivas haguf. So what? So those mitzvahs are nehagon back in the Braisa. Bein ba'aretz, bein b'chutz la'aretz. Ava kol davar she'enoi tala ba'aretz. She'enoi tala ba'aretz. Af kol davar she'enoi tala ba'aretz. Right? Bris mila v'chulei. Yehei noyeg ba'aretz u'b'chutz la'aretz. However, me'atom. That what? That once we went into Golus, we are exempt of keeping the mitzvahs at Taloyis Ba'aretz. Mishagolu Yehei Peturin. Meaning that all of the mitzvahs that are Taloyis Ba'aretz have to be kept. What happens when we were sent into Golus? We don't have to keep them. They're not Noihagos. There's no mitzvah. So now the Havamina is, once we were exempted from keeping those mitzvahs, who told you that when we returned to the Holy Land, who told you that the mitzvah returned? Maybe we were exempted. We have a ptur. That's the shaila. How do you know it comes back? So says the Gemara, for that, we have a pasuk in Nehemiah. And we're being moitze the mikra midei pshuta. There it says, vayas kol hakohol, hashavim min hashvi. Then they made sukkos and they sat in sukkos. Then he goes weiter, kiloi osu b'imei Yeshua ben Nun. If you take this pasuk literally, it sounds like that after Golus, Bavel, until the settlement of Ezra, during that period, we never sat in Sukkot. But when we came back, now we sat in Sukkot. That would be the pshat, the simple pshat on the pasuk. So before we go on to analyze that, the Yehoshua ben Nun is not spelled mitahei. He's spelled Yeshua. So frag the Gemara, why is the hey removed from Yehoshua? V'lama Yeshua answers the Gemara that Rabbi Hillel b'rei Rabbi Shmuel ben Nachman says Gavaldik. He says, Pagam hakosuf kvoit hatzadik bekever. Listen to this line. B'pnei kvoit tzadik b'shatoi. The very fact that Yeshua's conquest was much greater than Ezra's settlement. Yeshua led all of the Eden went into Eretz Yisrael. Ezra brought up so few people with him. And even more than that, even the people that he brought with him were dafka, they're not miyuchasim. At least he did a service that he cleared out. He took all of the problems to Eretz Yisrael. Now you understand why. Asara Yuchsin, all right, the fourth chapter of Masechtas Kedushin. He left the pure lineage in Bavel because since the main leadership was in Eretz Yisrael, you can't look over them to make sure that they don't marry. The yichus is so important by us. So that it appeared that he was much weaker than Yeshua. So to give kavod to Ezra, we diminished Yeshua. Pagam hakosuf kavod tzadik bekever mipnei kavod tzadik b'shatoi. What a concept! Not like this Meisim with the Rebbe Rashab told, right? The Rebbe Marash told him, yeah, you don't become bigger by putting your brother down. You become bigger by you getting yourself bigger. Not okay. That for that we have we're Ashreinu, we're Hasidim. There's an evolution. In the earlier times, but you minimize someone. It's not true. You took away his hay to make him look bigger. Now, says the Gemara, one thing is clear. You see, the Braisa and the Yerushalmi are very mekatzer. You cannot say that the pasuk is kipshutai. Right? Look inside the Mara Fulda. 5 lines from the top. Ma'atam yishagolu yipturim. Ma'oisen mitzvahs hatuleim ba'aretz. Af shechazru la'aretz. Shekvar bitl kedushas ha'aretz. So answers the Gemara Ksiv. I'm learning in the Mara Fulda. Tirutzahu. The ef shaloimer king. Shiyupturim. Because the makshinat biyosum may Ezra lach shechazru megolos ba'avol biyosum may Yeshua. We compare them together. Kamoy shemitzinu may Yeshua. That kishiyotsu megolos mitzrayim v'nichnusu la'aretz. Is mitchilo ha'ipturim. And Mishabol La'aretz Nischayvu Hachanayim Meyez. In other words, this whole pasuk Vayaskol Hakol that they began, the pasuk is telling you that now that we re-entered, now the obligation came back. The pasuk is speaking about Sukkos. Fa'af al Gav says the Marafulda the Krab is Sukkos Ksiv. First of all, Hu Adin L'Chol Shar Mitzvahs. V'Loibah HaKosav Rak LaHashvez Biyosin LaHadodei. Invited in Marafulda. V'lama Yeshua Chased Hey Ksiv. So the answer is Pagam Chuli Loimer. Afagav the Yeshua Godel Meyezra Hayam. Mikol Makoim Hashto Yeshua Meis. The Ezra Kayam. Now Godel Ezra Me Yeshua. V'afilo Hay Yeshua Kayam Hashto. Hoyel V'shatoi the Ezra Hu Haya. Ezra Godel Mimenu. Look at this word. It's even saying he's saying 2 layers. First of all, he was not here. Second of all, even if there would have been Azatchias HaMesim and Yeshua would have been there, since God gave this time for Ezra to be the leader, if people would have seen them, they would have seen greater greatness in Ezra than Yeshua. Now let's go back on the Gemara. Hikish biyasan. The point of
the Marafulda didn't know the Gemara in Tanis that the tzaddikim b'mitatam nikrim chaim. I understand the second part, but the first part, how can we ignore it?
Okay, that's what he meant by the second part. That it wasn't that he wasn't here; he's here. But whoever is given from the Oibishter the responsibility and the merit of being the leader at that time, they are giving certain koiches that are greater than others for that time. The koiches that are needed for that time. I think that's what he's really saying. He didn't like the mace. He's building up. Now, Hikish biyasin back in the Gemara, Hikish biyasin b'mei Ezra, biyasin b'mei Yoshua. To tell you, not about the Sukkah, it's just Ma biyasin b'mei Yoshua. God, Hashem gave us the Torah 40 years before. When Hashem gave us the mitzvahs, many mitzvahs, when you entered the land, we were not keeping many of the mitzvahs. That's why Moshe Rabbeinu wanted to go to Eretz Yisrael. What happened when we entered Eretz Yisrael? That Peturim Hayim, we came from a state of being pottered from many mitzvahs, and simply by the fact that now we have a Jew in the Holy Land, V'nischayvu, that is exactly what happened again. Af biyasin b'mei Ezra, Peturim Hayu, and now V'nischayvu. Beautiful. Okay. Now, I want to share the following idea. And the idea is like this, that when the Rambam, we read from the Rambam gives a svara, that since the conquest of Oilei Mitzrayim was Bekibush, so the Kibush nullified the Kibush. When we settled it, because we had Rishus, and it was simply a king and Chazaka, that's Lo Oilam. So I have two kashas. Kasha number one is, when Yeshua conquered it, he didn't just conquer it and he walked away. He didn't go into Gaza and leave Gaza. He went in there and he settled it. The 7 years of conquest and the 7 years of division of settlement. There was also Chazaka. You understand the kasha? And second of all, on the other hand, if Kibush of the Goyim somehow Mamash removed the Kedusha because Kibush was Mavatal the Kibush, well, what about all of the parts of the Holy Land that no Jews were settled and Goyim settled there? So why won't their Chazaka remove our Chazaka? And this is connected to what we read from the Rambam, Hilchos Beis HaBchira, and that is that the Kedusha of the Beis HaMikdash, which is connected to the Shechina lo yizazam imkoimo, that Kedusha is forever. Let me use words of Hasidus, that there's a big nafkamina whether something is given to you milmailo lamata. If it's given to you milmailo lamata, it's shaykh for you to lose it because it's not yours. Masha'enkin, something that comes milmata lamaila can take a much longer time, but whatever you have is yours. You worked on it. You got it. It's yours forever. Instead of using the words milmailo lamata, milmata lamaila, let's use another mashal. Yerushalmi, think about it. Who conquered Yerushalmi? The end. David HaMelech. So the first conquest was from the outside to the inside. We began with Yerichai, and at the end we came to Yerushalayim. Since Yerushalayim's Kedusha never left, so when Ezra resettled the land, the Kedusha began from Yerushalayim. It began in the heart, it began Bepnimius, and from there it expanded outwards. That's why that Kedusha can never be nullified. I'm looking at the Gabai's forehead. Normally I get a confirmation. He's still bewildered. I don't know what to do with that. If you have a better explanation, please share.
No, it's a great explanation because the whole, it doesn't make so much sense when you think about it. Like Yeshua and the conquest, it was like, that was the greatest thing, and yet that ended. Meanwhile, right. We come up with the Persians, not even our own, we're not even in charge of ourselves. They gave us permission to, and that lasted forever. It's kind of illogical.
And saying these words fit with the Rambam. In other words, let's speak about nowadays, that if a Yid understands that our connection to the Eretz Yisrael is because God gave it to us, it's organically ours. We'll never lose it. It will always be ours. The moment you attribute it to external factors, the external gave, the external took. It has to come from the pnimius, not from the chitzonius. It has to come from the inner, not from the outer. Let's go weiter. We have another few minutes. Let's hop another few lines because tomorrow we have a beautiful daf also. Now, 1 second. Now it returned. I want to know, to what level did it return? Miman Neschayv was not from what? Miman Neschayv means when we came back under the leadership of Ezra, to what level are we chayiv to keep? For that, Rabbi Yosef Bar Chanina Amar, midvar Torah Neschayvu. We became obligated to keep them on a biblical level, not a rabbinic level. And Hadod Chsiv, Veheviyacha Hashem Elokecha La'aretz, Asher Yorshu Avisecha V'Yirishta, says Daf Mem Gimel, Hikish Yerushascha Yerushas Avisecha, Ma Yerushas Avisecha Midvar Torah, Mamish came back. The Kedusha came back altogether. Af Yerushascha, your conquest, we're speaking about Ezra Sofer. Now that we are back, what do we have to keep? We have to keep the mitzvahs, Hataluyas, Ba'aretz, Midvar Torah on a biblical level. Guys, we're going to stop over here. And how geschmack is it? And there's a lot more to go on this. To be continued.
Go ahead.
Yeah,
Very important.